Well, here we are. It is 12:09 on Monday afternoon. It is November the 9th of 2015, and I am Hank Pattison, and this is The Life of the Mind, my little podcast where I talk about stuff. Let's be honest, I talk about comic and movie related stuff. Specifically, talk about comics being turned into movies. I guess I don't talk that much about movies being turned into comics. That does happen. I think they did a Mad Max comic this year. Traditionally, comics that get turned, that are created from movies, are terrible. A few years ago, Marvel and DC both stopped doing comic book adaptations of their movies because they're terrible. They're never worth reading. Generally speaking, I feel like one of the last ones they did was maybe for the first Fantastic Four movie, and like, those were supposed to retail for something like $18.99, and we wound up selling them for $2 a piece in the end. So kind of a waste of time on everybody's level. Yeah, so that's stuff that I talk about. This week I'm doing a review request. A good friend of mine, Chris Ing, he's on Twitter at Hoodie Ripper because that's the style of fiction that he writes. I'll let him explain that. He's not here, but I'll let you ask him to explain that. He asked me if I could read and review Klaus. Klaus is the new book from Grant Morrison. It's written by Grant Morrison, and it's drawn by Dan Mora. And yeah, it's called Klaus. It's basically, the easiest way I can summarize it is to say that it's the Game of Thrones origin story for Santa Claus. And I don't think I'm being weird when I say that. I think that's very close to literally exactly what it is. Except, it's not literally Game of Thrones, but it's literally Santa Claus, and it's a very Game of Thrones-esque world. It's Santa Claus. It's not him when he's a young man. Like, I feel like Claus is, I don't think he's going gray yet. Maybe he's about my age, 35, 36. I turn 37 next week, so I hope you have something nice picked out for me. I like food as a gift. So this is the story of Kris Kringle, or Claus. I that part I'm not actually sure about. I was noting online that people were referring to Grant Morrison as one of those people you either love or hate. And I sort of see him being talked about in the same way that I see people talking about Quentin Tarantino, that he has an extremely loyal cult following. And then he has a larger following of people who really like his stuff. And then you have an even larger following of people who like his stuff but hate him as a person and wish he would just shut up. I know a lot of people feel that way about Grant Morrison. A lot of people feel that way about Quentin Tarantino. I think there's a handful of other artists out there that I don't think that's an uncommon way for people to feel about their artists. And this idea that anybody who produces art or literature should be somebody who anybody can just get along with instantaneously is kind of a dumb idea. Great artists aren't Mr. Rogers type friendly personas. Great artists are difficult people to deal with. I don't think there's anything wrong with that idea. But what did I think? What did I think? What do I think? What do I think of Klaus? I really liked it. I thought it was a really fun book. It's very well drawn. The art is pretty gorgeous in it, and I honestly think it was one of the best Grant Morrison comics I've read. I come from sort of, I guess, what would now be referred to as the old school of Grant Morrison fans. I think he did most of his best work in the early to mid 90s. I'm talking about the Invisibles. I'm talking about the Filth. I'm talking about Flex Mentallo. Um, I like some of his later stuff, but his early stuff, it really affected me. It affected me as a reader, and it affected me as a person. It was simply some of the most incredible storytelling I had ever read. And I think he had a real ear for dialogue. He still does, but he's gotten a little high concept over the past few years, and I feel like he's not telling as concise stories because of that. Klaus does not have that problem. Klaus is very concise. I can get a strong feel for who the characters are. I can relate to things they're going through, even though they seem sort of Klaus himself or Kris Kringle or whoever this main character who will someday be Santa Claus. He's a big tough dude. Like, he's almost supernaturally strong. You see that he's bonded with wolves, and rather than taking the traditional path of having him, I'm sure if Grant Morrison from 10 years ago had written this book, or if Warren Ellis had written this, there's a part in it where he should be eating magic mushrooms and tripping balls and stuff. And instead, he... Is this a spoiler? I'm not sure. I guess it sort of is. He plays a musical instrument, and the musical instrument summons supernatural entities who take him on a vision quest. I thought it was a really nice sort of twist on the classic character takes drugs and has a vision in the forest. Like, that's a very trite cliche at this point in time, and I thought Morrison did a nice job of subverting that by adding that it was a musical. And I kind of like that idea, that especially for primitive people, I think primitive, I just mean people who existed before the modern age, where we're kind of jaded assholes. I can imagine in a simpler time, when you didn't have recording devices, you didn't have any electronics or anything like that, that music was a much more sublime experience, that listening to somebody play a flute or a guitar, it's something we really take for granted now. I grew up around musicians, and personally, I find it really boring when people play music around me. I'm not a fan of live music because I grew up around it, and it allows me to just take it for granted. It's the same way, like, you grow up with anything, you can grow to take advantage of it, or you can grow to just look past it and you don't care. I know so many people who are so thrilled if somebody at a party will break out a guitar or something. And for me, I'd rather listen to a well-programmed album where somebody has really produced all of the music I'm listening to and sort of brought it together for a purpose. But that's... am I saying that live music isn't a good thing? No, live music is obviously a good thing, and I think I'm the one who's jaded, and I'm the one who's kind of twisted on that. I thought it was, so I thought the element of using music as a psychedelic experience, I thought was a really nice touch. I think Klaus was a really good book. It was a really good first issue, and I think you should read it. If you enjoy, well, Grant Morrison, Santa Claus, or Game of Thrones, I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly who this book is meant for, but I think there's a lot of people. And it's not like it's done tongue-in-cheek. I've seen tough guy Santa Claus stories done before, especially back in the 90s. There was a lot of, like, Santa with a machine gun and Santa ain't taking your shit no more. This is not that. There's a sense of something very genuine going on here. Something sort of meaningful. So, in the end, I liked Klaus. I give it, for a single issue, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Give it 3 3/4 out of 4 thumbs up. I give it... That's it. I'm not going to sit here and come up with more hilarious ways to express the same thing that I'm saying. It's 9 out of 10. It's, whoa, 9 out of 10. Come on, scale it back there, man. It's an 8, maybe an 8.5. I think maybe it was so basically good that I might be overlooking the fact that it's not really, there's not a lot of structure to it. I mean, it's not like it's about something. It's not like I read it and I'm like, oh man, this guy really is like taking the current political system to task for their outmoded views or something like that, which, was kind of one of my favorite things to read about. Hey, you know what's cool? Movies. Movies are cool. Sometimes. Some movies are cool. I watched a couple of movies recently, and some were cooler than others. Um, the other day I watched The Departed, which I believe that's a Martin Scorsese film. I don't really know how to pronounce his last name right. Marty. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Marky Mark. Man, there's one or two other really big names in it. I remember, like, every time I turned around, there was a new character being introduced who was being played by a fairly major actor, which to a degree kind of bugged me. All-star casts can kind of get on my nerves a little bit. I don't like the idea that there might be literally a million actors trying to get work at any one given time, and that Hollywood would prefer to employ 100 specific actors over and over and over again. Um, I would rather see more movies made for less money, making more people famous, rather than just a handful of movies making just a handful of people famous. Something like that. Listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I did not enjoy The Departed. I think it was about 2.5 hours long, and there was a point where I looked up and suddenly realized that there was only a half hour left of the movie, and I was really pissed off that I had wasted the previous 2 hours watching it. But I knew, excuse me, I knew that I had to keep watching it to the end. Like, what's the point otherwise? I mean, I guess I could have just sealed it off and gone and read the last bit of it on Wikipedia, but it was like, stuck it out for 2 hours, watch, see how it ends. I didn't care for the ending. And I didn't care for the journey that took me to the ending. And throughout all of this, I think the conclusion that I took when all was said and done was that I'm just not a Martin Scorsese. Jeez, Martin Scorsese? Scazy? I just don't dig old MS. Multiple sclerosis. Who does? No, I've watched a bunch of his movies. I'm trying to think of what they are now. What do I know him best as? I mean, I kind of have a lot of fondness for Goodfellas. I probably always will. I really enjoy it. It has whatever critical acclaim, whatever negative things you want to say. I Outside of everything else, I just kind of enjoy it as a movie. But I feel like I've watched a few of his movies now, and I've wound up just feeling like it's such a weird thing because I believe the directors I love him. Like, I know he's Quentin Tarantino's favorite director as far as I know. And I assume probably the Coen brothers like his stuff as well, but I don't care for him. Um, I can tell that what he's doing must be good. It's the same way that I feel about Christopher Nolan. Obviously, Christopher Nolan isn't a bad director. I think I said this before in my Christopher Nolan chapter. Um, I just don't. I don't respond to what he's doing, and that's fine. Like, there's all sorts of people will I'll say you make bad art, but I'm not going to say that about Martin. He makes obviously art that changes people's lives and affects them on a deeply personal level. I'm just not one of those people. And it's funny because the people who do really affect me, they love him so much. And I wish I felt the same way. But I really did not enjoy The Departed. It just, I didn't like the characters, which I think is maybe a problem that I have with his stuff, that I don't connect to who those characters are, and I find that it pushes me away from the story. I want characters I can really enjoy. Whatever. I just didn't dig it, man. I just didn't dig it. Very strong performances. Very strong direction. Oh, frog in the throat there. Yeah, like, again, I can't say anything critical. That was a very well made meal. I did not like that meal. It was not a bad meal. That just ain't the kind of food I like to eat. Man, I feel that way so much about whenever I go out to a fancy restaurant. I'm not a fancy restaurant guy, and those tastes, they don't suit what my tastes are. I hate duck. I can barely eat a cream sauce. Like, the fancier something gets, the more expensive it gets, generally, the less I wind up enjoying it. And there's this sort of perfect level of like, if I can pay about $5 for a really good hamburger, I'm having a good day. I'm real happy at that point. Yeah, so no thumbs up for The Departed. But like I say, I'm not going to stand here and say, what a terrible movie. I'm completely willing to say I didn't enjoy that movie. It's not that it was a bad movie. It's that it's me. That's the problem was me. The reason that didn't work. Whatever. At the same time, well, not obviously at the same time, that would be kind of hilarious. I rewatched Miller's Crossing. Miller's Crossing by the Coen brothers, written and directed by the Coen brothers. Man, what an incredible movie. I've seen it a few times. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I haven't. You know, this is maybe my fourth or fifth time through it. And I really feel like I get the story now. Like I'm inside it. I get all the beats. I understand why everything that happens. I get who everybody is. I can tell who they're talking about. I'll acknowledge the first couple of times I watched Miller's Crossing, I don't think I had a clue what was going on. I could barely follow who anybody was or why things were connected or why they were happening. I knew it was wonderful and I loved the tone and the look and the feel of it all. And I laughed at the punchlines, but I don't know if I necessarily understood why I was laughing. Now I get it. And arguably it is. It's one of the finest movies I've ever seen. To my awareness, it is one of the finest movies ever made. It is just it's just a lot of fun is what it is. On the other hand, there is really only one female character in the entire movie. I'm not saying it doesn't have its shortcomings. It's not a perfect film by any means. It could probably do to have a few other stronger female voices in it. But, that's, again, not everything is everything all the time. So I think one of the things I like about Miller's Crossing as well, and this is kind of separate, is that it's a companion piece to Barton Fink. I believe the Coen brothers wrote Barton Fink, which is on my very, very top 5 of all-time favorite movies. I mean, I think it might go like Pulp Fiction, Barton Fink, Reservoir Dogs, Jackie Brown, Kill Bill. Those my top 5 favorite movies of all time. I'm such a simple guy. 2 directors, 3 guys, basically 2 groups of people make up my whole, like, probably my top 10 list. Eventually get Edgar Wright in there. So 2 Coen brothers, Edgar Wright and Quentin Tarantino. I don't even know anybody else. Now, I follow a few other directors. There's a few other directors I'm interested in. And I'm always willing to give people a chance. I'm very interested to see how Tim Miller handles Deadpool. I've read a bunch about it. I'm buddies with Ed Skrein, who's playing the villain in it, so we've had a chance to kind of discuss a little bit of the process going into it. So I'm always on the lookout for new talent and people doing interesting stuff. I know I should be watching more of Lexi Alexander's stuff. I've listened to interviews with her, and I, of course, know her from Punisher Warzone. And Punisher Warzone is one of those projects where I wrote it off. I think I saw the trailer, and then, I don't know. I think I watched a couple of scenes from it, something like that, and I didn't understand the tone, and I just walked away from it. I was like, oh, well, I love this version of the Punisher that Garth Ennis wrote. I think that's what he's supposed to be like. I don't care for people doing other interpretations of it, and I just walked away. And then I listened to the How Did This Get Made podcast, and that's a podcast that does sort of sarcastic reviews of movies, and they did The Punisher, having Patton Oswalt as their guest with Lexi Alexander as their special guest, and the crew at How Did This Get Made and Patton Oswalt and Lexi Alexander all discussed how The Punisher Warzone got made. And that blew my head open, listening to her talk about it, listening to the process, listening to why she did it, listening to what attracted her to the project, listening to how all the little pieces came together. It was fascinating, and it gave me a totally different understanding for how movies were made, for the process, and of course for Punisher Warzone. After listening to the podcast, I went out and I watched the movie, and it was incredible. Punisher Warzone is a great, almost satire of 80s action movies. The only things that are wrong with the movie, and maybe I'm just showing off a little of my preferential treatment here, but the only things that are wrong with Punisher Warzone are the things the studio did to kind of mess around with Lexi Alexander's vision of what the movie was supposed to be. The biggest one of that was soundtrack. Lexi had picked out her own soundtrack that was supposed to go to the movie. I would be very interested in hearing it. And the studio put in something that was supposed to make it sound like the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, which was a terrible idea. I'm not a fan of that kind of score in the first place. I honestly think orchestrated scores in movies are kind of lazy. I don't know. I feel like it's the non non-lyrical way of having the music just tell you how to feel. Whereas, like I love Tarantino for using pop music, and specifically using pop music that contrasts with the scenes that he's doing, so that you don't know how to feel about things. Like, oh, you're kind of happy because this thing is happening, but you're kind of sad and scared because this other thing is happening. I like that. And I like, like Stanley Kubrick in 2001, like that's a very well used orchestrated score. But sometimes I feel like when you're writing music specifically for a movie, it can get kind of, I don't know. It just doesn't always work. Anyways, what I hear is that Lexi had somebody do some music which wasn't just an orchestrated score so much as like it sounded like it was much more like greedy 80s. I don't know. It's really hard to describe music with words, and it's music I haven't even heard. I was just very interested. As is always the case, I am very interested to see a director's cut, which I know will never happen. We'll never get to see Josh Trank release a director's cut of the Fantastic Four, because that would probably take like the same amount of money that it took to release it in the first place. All for a thing that did not make any money at all whatsoever. The Josh Trank's Fantastic Four. I don't actually know. I assume Punisher Warzone didn't do that well in theater because I never heard people talking about it. I think it's a slow burn. I think it's slowly becoming an acceptable cult hit amongst the comic community. I think someday Punisher Warzone will be like The Crow. It'll be a definitively great thing that is still a little so far left of center. And I don't mean politically left, I just mean like so far out from the mainstream that people can never quite get a grip on it. They're never quite, it's tongue-in-cheek enough that they're never sure if they're laughing with it or at it, and that will always keep some people a little uncomfortable about what's being said and done. Anyways, things I like: Miller's Crossing, Punisher Warzone. Was there something else in that? It's talking about Batman again. Always talking about Batman. Can't go a day without Batman sneaking in there to bat stuff up. I am looking forward to Batman versus Superman. I like the tone that they're taking for it. As much as I was not a fan of Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, most of that just had to do with, again, same thing as sort of as I said with The Departed. Very well shot movie with excellent acting and just such dynamic visual sense. With a script that I just didn't really respond to. And again, like that's always me. I have very specific tastes when it comes to writing and dialogue and just how story is structured and how narratives are told. And I fully acknowledge, like I'm a snob. I like what I like, and that's not much. you know? I respond to maybe 5% of the writing that I am exposed to in film and TV and comics and literature of all forms. Most of it just I don't I don't really care for. And it's not that I think other things are bad. It's just personal preference, you know? Life's too short for writing of a certain sense. And again, I think I've stressed this point on previous podcasts. Like, I think it would be a mistake to make all writing, all stories what I want them to be. Again, my tastes are very specific, and there are over 6 billion people on this earth, all of whom need stories so they can experience joy and tragedy through fiction and learn about life and learn about themselves. And obviously, we're all so different from one another while still being so similar. Of course, there should be billions of different types of stories being told all the time for everybody. And at the same time, it's one of those like, that doesn't mean you need to be omnivorous. Some people are. Some people, man, I know this dude who would come into my comic book store all the time in between movies who just watched every movie. And for the most part, he loved them all. Like, I want to say that guy had like a 95% love to hate ratio on movies. I don't, I'm mixing my numerical metaphors there. I'm just saying he loved them. He'd always come in and he'd be like, oh yeah, man, I've heard about people trashing this movie, but I had a great time. As somebody sitting in the theater, being exposed to shit, you're just having a great time. And I really respect that. I wish I could unplug and do that a little bit more easily than I currently do. I think it's difficult for me to just take on a piece of literature. I have a lot of filters that I apply to everything that I'm looking at, and they're not just like pop culture or political filters. They're just, I don't know. I say this so often, like, just, I like what I like. I do. I can't make any excuses about it. I mean, I'm gonna be 37 next week. And I don't want to say that I'm set in stone and this is my personality, but at the same time, I've gotten to understand myself by watching how I behave over time. And I've grown to see what I like and what I don't like, and what I respond to and what I don't respond to. And I've come to sort of an understanding, or at least some theories about what's going on there. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with feeling like I know where I'm coming from. I like the stuff I like. I think everybody should. Well, I mean, obviously everybody should, but I mean, you know, overtly. I don't care if it's X-Files or My Little Pony or whatever it is. I don't see any shame in liking something. I mean, people are going to say that, and then, you know, somebody's immediately going to start jerking off to Nazi porn or something. Be like, oh, well, I guess you should be sort of ashamed of that. But I don't know, man. For like fiction is fiction is fiction. As much as people want to get upset about it, as much as you can say, like, well, yeah, but drawing a picture of you killing your parents is still a disturbing image. Yeah, but it's not killing your parents. A picture of a thing is not a thing. And it's not evidence of anything. I'm sure you can find patterns or, you know, like, oh, this person is upset and they're writing disturbing stuff. But hey, maybe that's how they get it out of their system. Maybe for some people it makes it worse. You know, like, I think, once again, in the end, you can't make blanket statements that cover all of humanity. People got to be free to do stuff. And I mean, where are you more free than on the page? On the page, you can draw whatever you want. You can write whatever you want. It can be words. It can be garbled. It can be nonsense. It can be you sticking a knife in your own belly. And it's just images on a page. I do think it's so interesting when people get so upset about things like that. Whether it's certain religions being upset that you would visually depict their god, or I think I heard something about people are upset because the current seasonal Starbucks cups, the seasonal cups, don't have Christmas decorations on them. So people are seeing that as being anti-Christian, which is just mind-blowing. You would think that Christians would not want Christian and Christmas symbolism on things that are being sold to people, because I don't understand. I don't understand any of it. It's not my place to understand. Somebody, a sociologist much more intelligent than me, will put those pieces together and be able to like, oh, this is why humanity is fucked up, man. Humanity is fucked up. But at least sometimes we make comics that are cool. Sometimes comics are cool. That's cool. Yeah, stuff is cool. I like stuff. You know what? I think that's what we're talking about today. I think we're talking about a lot of stuff. I think stuff has been talked about, which means it's time for me to say that once again, this has been The Life of the Mind, and as always, I am Hank Pattison, your host, and this is the part right at the very end where I hope you have a really nice day. Later.
Okay, so tell me again about the hash bar.
Okay, what you want to know?
Hash is legal now, right?
Yeah, it's legal, but it ain't 100% legal. I mean, you just can't walk into a restaurant, roll a joint, and start puffing away. I mean, they want you to smoke in your home or certain designated places.
And those are hash bars.
Yeah, it breaks down like this, okay? It's legal to buy it. It's legal to own it. And if you're the proprietor of a hash bar, it's legal to sell it. It's legal to carry it, but that doesn't matter, because get a load of this, all right? If you get stopped by a cop in Amsterdam, it's illegal for them to search you. I mean, that's the right that cops in Amsterdam don't have.
Oh, man, I'm going. That's all it is to it. I'm fucking going.
No, baby. You think.